Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maria Sole Calvi, and today I will present you the talk entitled Effects of Local Disturbance on High-Andean Forest Composition and Cover. So the talk consists of the integration of two different research papers. It will include an introduction on the general context. Then I will proceed to explain you the methodologies and main results of each paper, then to the integration of the results, and lastly to the discussion, where I will provide you the insights into the effects of forest cover changes through time on forest community composition and structure. So high-Andean forests in Colombia, as you know, were defined as fundamental ecosystem services providers. They're highly biodiverse, heterogeneous, and home to many endemic taxa. Also, they're threatened by land use intensification and change, overexploitation, mismanagement, and climate change. And they're mostly unprotected from rural management activities. The study area was located in Colombia, in the Bogotá Distrito Capital department, and also surrounding areas, in 6 localities in particular, where we established 32 forest plots in cooperation with the Rastrojo project. So the first study was a study of forest cover and connectivity through time, where we retrieved aerial images from the 40s of the study localities, and there we proceed to do a classification of the land cover types in tree, grass, and bare or built-up areas, and then we calculated landscape connectivity metrics. The second study was a study of forest communities in relation to anthropic disturbance, where we established 32 forest plots. We sampled the trees and understory layer, and it was an exploratory analysis linking a wide array of predictors, including climatic, landscape, and anthropic related one, to responses that included the structural parameters, compositional parameters, and diversity metrics, including taxonomical, functional, and phylogenetic. So the main results from the first study were that the forest cover was increasing in all localities except one, and also connectivity was generally restored in this study time frame. And the main results from the second paper included the finding that the forests in the vicinity of Bogotá were floristically and structurally not homogeneous, and there was a high beta diversity, especially in the understory layer. We also found that geo-environmental and disturbance predictor were effective in predicting community composition and structure. And also that paired to a disturbance increase, we saw a negative effect on the tree phylogenetic dispersion and diversity and above ground biomass, but also an increase of understory phylogenetic dispersion. And lastly, the above ground biomass and the percentage of late successional species were efficient indicators of the status of forest fragments in terms of human disturbance. So as I was saying, one of the main results from the second article was a low regional homogenization, also found by Hurtado Martiletti in a partially overlapping study area. And it is possible, actually, that local history and locality history plays a role on top of local climatic and edaphic condition in shaping the communities. So as you can see in the below ordination plot, the localities do not group together clearly. So the integration of the results was done by linking cover and connectivity history in each locality to assess community composition, structure, and diversity by pooling localities data. So we performed an analysis of variables grouped by localities, and then an indicator species analysis for each locality, and then a discussion in relation to localities' forest cover history. So here, as you can see, for example, we have some structural metrics, the mean diameters, the number of large trees, height, and above ground biomass. And as you can see, for example, Guatavita scores very low on each metric. But on the other hand, for example, Sumapaz and Tabio score quite high on the number of large trees, and Sumapaz score very high on above ground biomass. We also have compositional parameters. These are just some examples, of course. There were many more metrics. And here, the first one is the invasive species cover fraction. As you can see, in Tabio and Torca, the values were quite high. On the other hand, the below part of the slide, we have number and percentage of individual of late successional species. And as you can see, for Sumapas and Torca, those were quite high. Then we have the diversity metrics. For example, the top two are phylogenetic diversity of the tree layer and the understory layer. And as you can see, Sumapas, Tabi, and Torca score the highest values among all localities. Whereas for functional richness, for example, we have very low values of richness from Pasquilla and Huasca. But on the other hand, functional evenness, their score is higher somehow, closer to the one of Tabio and Torca. So we come to the first locality that we will discuss in detail. The plots in this locality were aged, the minimum age was 73 years. They showed intermediately high DBH, height, and HB values. And one invasive species was present in the tree layer, which was Ulex europaeus. And also Uparcia puridea was found to be in the indicator species for the understory. There is a high number of fast-growing species, many individual of few late successional species, and overall the species were from closely related family, meaning a low phylogenetic diversity. And as you can see from the graph on the right, there is a steady increase of forest cover and core areas through time, but also this fragment showed a persistent and severe disturbance from a limestone mining that brought about a disturbance that allowed Ulex europaeus to make its way into the forest cover. So we have then Guatavita, where the minimum age of the plots was 22 years. This locality scored the lowest values in structural, compositional, and diversity metrics, but it showed no invasive species. And interestingly, the indicator species for the tree layer was Mytenus laxiflora, which is a very interesting high-Andean species. And as you can see from the graph, the tree cover, which is in green, darkest green, increased through time steadily here, and also core areas. And there was a steady edge and a decrease of connectors, meaning that overall there was no ongoing fragmentation. So these fragments under study in Guatavita are relatively undisturbed and recovering, but early stage of the succession of high-Andean forest. So it will be very interesting to see what happens in the next year there. Coming to Pasquilla, the minimum age of the plots was 77 years, and these were homogeneous forest fragments in terms of age. And they showed low values of structural metrics, except tree height and height variance, meaning certain degrees of stand heterogeneity. And there was a good amount of late successional individual, but from few species. A low phylogenetic diversity, and Digitalis purpurea was found to be the indicator species of the understory. In this locality, we saw first a decrease of forest cover and then an increase around the 90s, and also in connectors and edge. These fragments are interestingly protected, most of them, but also they showed a continuous nearby agriculture and forest product usage presence. And they are part of the management plan from the local population, meaning that actually there was an ongoing usage of the forest. And that might be why, even though they're the oldest plots in our study, they do not show the highest biomass values and highest diversity somehow. So then Sumapas, the minimum age was 52 years. There was a high structural metrics values. There were high structural metric values, highest above ground biomass, and fewer fast-growing species and mainly late successional species. Overall, there was a high tree and understory diversity. So here, forest cover increased since the 80s after an initial decline, and core areas increased from earlier on, from the 60s, roughly. And these fragments were very heterogeneous. Some of them were very well preserved and some of them were not, which may be a result of the different rate of rural depopulation that took place in the area after the beginning of the armed conflict. Then we have Tabio, where the minimum age was 56 years. And this locality displayed average values of structural metrics. high invasive and fast growing species values, and very high tree and understory phylogenetic diversity and functional evenness. And Cardamina ovata was found to be an indicator species for the understory. In this locality, we witnessed a steady increase of forest, a decrease of cover, and increase of edges and islets since the 90s, meaning that even though there was an increase of forest cover, there was a certain degrees of fragmentation going on in recent times, especially. So this locality displays an heterogeneous composition in terms of forest fragments, and some of them are relatively old with a complex composition, but with also a constant human intervention. And this could be also hypothesized from the presence of Cardamina ovata, which is a medicinal species, as an indicator species, meaning that somehow a constant human presence very close to the forest fragment. Lastly, we have Torca, where the minimum age was 65 years. And this locality displayed low to high values of structural metric, some invasive species, low to high values for late successional species, and low phylogenetic diversity and functional richness. And Clusia multiflora was found to be an indicator species for the tree layer. Clusia multiflora is another interesting high-Andean forest species. In this locality, we saw a defined increase of forest beginning from the 90s after a decrease, and the same was true for cover areas. Overall, this was the locality with the highest forest cover increase in percent. So this locality has a wide array of heterogeneous landscapes, and it's very close to the city, but also hosts some very well-preserved forest fragments where big individuals and interesting species were able to persist. So the conclusion are the studied forests are heterogeneous in terms of floristic and structure composition, and that the complex local history and historical land cover dynamics impact species composition and forest fragment structure. So thank you very much. And I would like to thank everyone that collaborated with this project and the Colbiodive project.